There's something wrong with this scene. Looks normal enough, right? Except, it shouldn't exist. Let me explain. Zenyasu is a coward. Not the kind that runs, but the kind that hides behind others. On the same day Tanjiro agrees to protect him, Zenyasu gets beaten half to death by this guy. Inosuke was raised by beasts. His family was slaughtered by a demon. So when he meets Tanjiro, a boy traveling with one, his rage makes perfect sense. With that in mind, here's what confuses me. Why are they This is really bad. But if we go back in time and find out where it all went wrong, maybe we can fix it. Let's not waste any time. No, way back. Perfect. So what exactly went wrong? At some point in writing, this world stopped being about people and started being about a person. I call this the protagonist black hole. When scenes and character motivations start bending unnaturally towards the main character, it goes beyond just bad storytelling, and the worst part is, once it happens, the story rarely recovers. I didn't choose the term black hole lightly. It's a destructive phenomenon, one that affects the story's core elements. Its structure, narrative, and themes. So how do stories end up here? Let's go back to this scene. Just 2 episodes earlier, these three couldn't stand each other. Zenitsu was desperate for safety, but gets beaten, and not only is Inosuke the one who did the beating, he also wanted to kill Tanjiro's sister. They had no shared goal and no reason to cooperate, but suddenly, they're traveling together, in perfect sync. No tension, no consequence, we see a bit of banter, but it's played for laughs, as if nothing ever happened. What we're seeing here is the first symptom of the protagonist's black hole. Its effects on the story's structure. That's when the world starts orbiting around the protagonist's path, characters stop making choices for themselves and exist only to move the main character forward. And that's what happened here. Zenitsu's fear doesn't matter anymore, and Inosuke's trauma is gone, literally. His reason to attack changes mid-fight, from killing demons to proving who's stronger, because for some reason now, Tanjiro is his rival. Every motivation was cast aside, because the story needed Tanjiro to have companions, and so suddenly, they exist as his companions. A good way to visualize this is like a barrier closing in around the protagonist's path, squeezing out every natural interaction, every consequence, until nothing can move freely anymore. What's left is just one perfect, uniform line, the main character, moving exactly as the author intended. That's structural collapse. Now, a narrative collapse looks a bit different. Here, it's not logic that gets erased, but whole storylines instead. And you can see it most clearly in Naruto, after the Sasuke retrieval arc, with Choji and Neji. Choji saw himself as laughingstock. Years of rejection left him insecure and hesitant. He faces those feelings in his fight with Jirobo, who mixes punches with the same insults Choji's heard his whole life. But what pushes him past his limits isn't anger. It's remembering the few people who saw him for who he truly was. Neji's battle is different, but just as personal. Raised to believe in fate and rule of the strong, his coldness toward others was taught, not chosen. But when faced with defeat during his duel with Kidomaru, someone more powerful than him, Neji refuses to accept it, not for pride, but to protect his friends. It's a moment of clarity and change. Yet later, none of this matters. Neji's new ideals never affect his clan, despite it being the main source of the past views he had to grow out of. And Choji's progress is erased entirely. You notice it during his reintroduction in Shippuden. In episode 54, a meal is interrupted when someone almost says the word fat. And in episode 62, we find out what happens when they actually do. It's played as comedy, but it's really tragedy. He's back where he started. If a structural collapse looks like walls closing in around the protagonist, then a narrative collapse is like the pruning of every other branch. Stories cut away so only one remains. And that brings us to the final symptom, a thematic collapse. When it happens, the story doesn't just lose its structure or subplots, it loses its soul. The different worldviews that once gave the story contrast all start bending through one narrow filter, until everything looks the same. In Attack on Titan, that filter is Eren Yeager. Early in the story, Eren's idea of freedom was rough but human. It was selfish, emotional, but it was real. And that theme didn't exist in a vacuum. Every major character had their own version of freedom, and that's what made the story so rich. For Armin, freedom meant understanding. You can see it in episode 13 of the first season, where he dreams of the sea. Not to conquer it, but to learn what's beyond it. For Erwin, freedom meant purpose. His iconic speech, the one he makes before he charges the Beast Titan knowing he'll die, shows that freedom to him was being able to choose how to go out on his own terms. For Mikasa, it meant connection. She finds strength not from independence, but from being with someone she loves. But as the story nears its end, all those definitions begins to twist through Eren's lens. Armin's curiosity turns into complicity. In Season 4, Episode 23, he justifies genocide, saying, "We have to believe in Eren." Erin's ideology disappears. His death leaves no successor, because the narrative no longer needs conflicting ideals. Choice is no longer attractive if Eren rejects it, and Mikasa's love becomes submission. By the end, her world begins and ends with Eren. And here's where it gets worse. The collapse doesn't just flatten others, it destroys Eren himself. The story told us his actions were inevitable, that he saw the future, but in his final moments, he says the opposite, that he did it out of his own twisted will. His philosophy eats itself alive and collapses the show's central themes into complete nonsense. Everyone's stories, motivations, and logic warped around one character. Few writers manage to avoid this, but when they do, they create worlds so dynamic you can't always tell who the protagonist is. I will talk about two shows that in my opinion executed this perfectly, and the first one is none other than Hunter x Hunter. What I love about Togashi's world is how it just makes sense. Despite being set in a fantasy world, the show convincingly grounds itself by letting characters naturally navigate it, and it begins with how they meet. Gon and Killua meet as naturally as kids their age would. Their first conversation is simple. Killua realizes they're the same age, and he's drawn to Gon's energy, while Gon just thinks Killua is cool. In 5 seconds, we understand everything. Killua's thoughtful curiosity, Gon's straightforward and pure nature, and the start of a friendship that feels effortless. But what truly sells their chemistry comes a few minutes later. When Killua challenges Gon to a race, they sprint past every contestant, smiling the entire time. It's playful but revealing. They're both gifted, and what's more important, they're just kids having fun. Compared to the Demon Slayer example earlier, nothing about their bond feels engineered. If you didn't know better, you'd think they grew up together. The group later expands with Kurapika and Leoria, one seeking justice for his clan, and the other is an aspiring doctor. It's an unusual mix, but it works because each character does their own thing. We grow attached to them not because the plot demands it, but because the show lets them be themselves. And this is where Togashi's restraint really shows. When the story shifts to the Chimera Ant arc, its largest and most intense, Leoria and Kurapika are absent. They might be main characters, but it's not their time yet. The Chimera Ant arc is where Hunter x Hunter stops being a shonen and becomes a masterpiece. The secret lies in the direction Togashi takes his characters, both literally and narratively. When Gon and Killua arrive on the island, they meet Kite, a seasoned hunter investigating an ant infestation. It seems routine until it explains the species' terrifying biology. They evolve by consuming what they eat. What begins as curiosity turns to horror as they discover the ants have started eating humans. Its defeat is instant. It's our first glimpse of Pito, a creature born already wielding Nen, proof that the threat was severely underestimated. When Killua knocks Gon unconscious to save him, even Kite acknowledges it. They're hopelessly outmatched. When we see the aftermath, we get a terrifying answer. The royal guards are stronger than any enemy we've seen so far. Intelligent, ruthless, and loyal. Yet it raises an even scarier question. Who are they guarding? Meruem, the Chimera Ant King, a perfect being with infinite potential. A genius born into brutality, the main antagonist. But as the story unfolds, we realize something quietly brilliant. Gon and Meruem will never meet. Their arcs mirror each other, both go on a journey of self-discovery, and many fans correctly point the parallels in their stories. But in my opinion, it goes beyond just storytelling techniques. Meruem is an existential threat. Just by being alive, he questions the natural hierarchy that humans were so used to. Gon, still impulsive and emotional, represents humanity at its most fragile. Despite his talent, he doesn't stand a chance, and so Togashi never forces their confrontation. The Ant King versus the chairman of the Hunter organization, the representative of humanity itself. Netero, the strongest hunter in the world, fights not to see who's stronger. He fights because he's the world's last hope. The stakes are too large. In contrast, Gon's conflict is more personal. It's about grief, guilt, and what happens to a person once stripped of their innocence. The scale is smaller, but it's not any less human. Separating these two arcs is a choice only a writer who truly respects his characters could make. It allows both to reach their full potential, Netero fighting for humanity as a whole, and Gon reminding us why it's worth saving. By respecting his characters, Togashi doesn't just build a world, he lets it breathe. And few stories capture that feeling better than Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Most stories end when the hero defeats the Demon King, but this one starts here. The world is saved, peace returns, and the heroes part ways. And then, time keeps moving for everyone except Frieren. She's an elf who's lived for over 1,000 years. But that lifespan becomes her curse. What felt like a decade of memories to her friends was barely a blink in her life. And only after Himmel's death does she realize what she's lost. That's the first trope Frieren subverts. Immortality isn't treated like a divine gift, but as a limitation that isolates her. Her first journey ended without her realizing it. The second begins when she meets Fern, an orphan raised by the priest Hyter. Frieren becomes her mentor, teaching her magic and history, but emotionally she's the one being taught. Because for all her centuries of life, Frieren never learned how to feel. Fern, still a child, becomes the one guiding her forward. And that sense of realism extends to everyone they meet. Each person has distinct motives, skills, and flaws. Which brings us to one of the show's most beautiful subversions. Sign is a priest, talented and experienced. Something we quickly see when he effortlessly cures Stark's poison. The more time we spend with Sign, the more we learn about his personality and quirks. He smokes, gambles, and drinks. Habits completely improper for a priest, yet as we know from numerous flashbacks, features that don't stop one from becoming great. Eventually, the party asks the question we've all been thinking. Do you want to join us? In any other fantasy, you join instantly. After all, a healer is exactly what the party needs. But in this story, the priest's name is Sign. He grew up in a small village and had a dream with a childhood friend Gorilla, who he made a promise with to go on an adventure and becomes hero that nobody will forget. So when the story gives him a choice, he chooses his own path. It's not the choice we expect, but it's one we can only respect. Frieren stands out not just because it breaks expectations, but because it honors its characters. Its world is alive, filled with a detailed yet intuitive magical system and characters who feel real. When stories bend around a protagonist, everything collapses. Characters lose agency, conflicts lose weight, and worlds feel hollow. But if they let characters make their own choices, let their decisions feel earned, then a story stops being about one person and becomes about everything worth telling.